vote, the yeas are 173, the nays are 249. The amendment.
Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. The members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House will work its way quickly through 8 amendment votes here. This one by Democrat Ed Markey of Massachusetts, which would ensure that if the Keystone XL pipeline was built, that the fuel from that oil remain in the U.S. 2-minute vote, and 7 more amendment votes after this one.
On this vote, the yeas are 172, the nays are 254.
Mr. Clark of Michigan. Mr. Clark of Michigan votes no. Ms. Schakowsky. Off no on aye for Ms. Schakowsky.
On this vote, the yeas are 173, the nays are 254. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 3, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-398, offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House began work today on the first of 3 parts to the 5-year, $260 billion surface transportation bill. Republican leaders yesterday deciding to split the bill in an effort to overcome opposition to some of the provisions. They've been spending the day today debating part of it that deals with the expansion of oil and gas drilling, as well as drilling in Alaska and the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, and the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. This is Bobby Rush's amendment. He's a Democrat from Chicago, and this deals with the use of eminent domain in the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline.
The yeas are 149, the nays are 276. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 4, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, in which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-398, offered by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
House Republican leaders yesterday decided to split the transportation bill into separate parts to overcome some opposition to some of the provisions in the bill. They've been debating today what's known as a pay-for, how the part of the bill will be paid for, and today's measure deals with expanding offshore and U.S. oil drilling and gas drilling, as well as expansion in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. This is an amendment by Mike Doyle of Pennsylvania, which would require that if a permit were issued for the Keystone pipeline, that some 75% of the iron and steel be used in the construction of the pipeline be made in the U.S. This is another 2-minute vote on the amendment. Coming up tomorrow morning on Washington Journal at 7:45, we're joined by Representative Barney Frank. He'll be on the program to talk about the president's budget and also the settlement with the banks over mortgage fees and lending. Also, and this as the Associated Press reports this afternoon that Joseph Kennedy III said today he's formally jumping into the race for the seat that's now being held by Barney Frank, who's retiring after this term. Joe Kennedy is expected to make an announcement on Thursday.
On this vote, the yeas are 193, the nays are 234. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 5, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Democrat Jared Polis's amendment to the measure dealing with the expansion of oil and gas drilling would strike language from the bill that directs the Interior Department to conduct an shale oil leasing program. The amendment would offset its cost by increasing the federal share of lease-related revenues. A couple of more amendment votes to go, and the House won't finish work on this bill this evening. That's likely tomorrow.
vote, the yeas are 160, the nays are 265. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 7, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Capps, on which the further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mrs. Capps of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
3 more amendment votes after this, amendments to the first part of the surface transportation bill. In writing about the bill this morning, the Washington Times says that in order to make the bill more palatable to conservatives, House GOP leaders included in the measure funding mechanisms for the controversial Keystone XL pipeline and expanded oil drilling, both offshore and in the Alaska Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But they write even that move has backfired a bit, as some Republicans say provisions to pay for infrastructure projects with future oil royalties is a budget gimmick that could exacerbate future budget deficits. The reporting of the Washington Times on the transportation measure, and again specifically on what the House has been debating today on the expansion of oil and gas drilling. This is an amendment by Lois Capps of California, which would strike the section directing oil and gas lease sales in Southern California and the section related to revenue sharing with coastal states.
On this vote, the yeas are 160, the nays are 265. The amendment is
Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw votes no. Mr. Denham. Mr. Denham votes no.
on this bill. The yeas are 160, the nays are 267. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 9, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mr. Bishop of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Tim Bishop's amendment would prohibit oil and natural gas lease sales on the outer continental shelf off the northeast coast of the U.S. Roll call writing about the transportation bill says the energy and pay-for bills are expected to pass easily. Neither include any significant new language, and House Republicans have already passed much of the language in separate legislation. The transportation bill, however, they write, is where the difficulty comes in. One Republican aide said the measure has pitted GOP factions against one another on issues ranging from preferential treatment for certain ports, public transportation spending, offshore drilling, and even anti-union provisions. There's a different transportation bill working its way through the Senate. They started some debate on it today. 2 years, $109 billion bill as opposed to the House's 5-year, $260 billion bill. Roll call writes about the Senate debate, saying that the Senate Majority Leader is walking a fine line as he looks to whittle the amendment list but retain enough Republican support to pass the legislation. They write aides expect debate to slip until after the President's Day recess, and the same story is likely true for the House version of the transportation bill as well.
On this vote, the yeas are 169, the nays are 257. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 11, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398 by the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Louisiana representatives, Republican Jeff Landry and Democrat Cedric Richmond, have teamed up for an amendment which would create a revenue-sharing scheme for states with offshore energy production. That would include Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama.
Vote. The yeas are 266, the nays are 159. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 12, printed in Part A of the House Report 112-398, from the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, on which the further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Mr. Deutsch of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
And more than likely, this is the last recorded vote of the day. An amendment by Democrat Ted Deutsch of Florida would require anyone, including in the application for a drilling lease, an oil or gas drilling lease, to estimate the economic impact, including job losses resulting from a worst-case discharge of oil from facilities that operate under the lease. This is a 2-minute vote, and the House will finish up work this evening, but not complete work on the first part of this transportation bill. Again, House leaders yesterday deciding to split the transportation bill up in an effort to overcome some of the opposition to the bill. Earlier today, Representative McGovern introduced into the record the Statement of Administration Policy, the President threatening to veto the package over concerns about some of the energy and drilling initiatives and also some of the highway safety provisions in the underlying bill. Members today have been focusing on expansion of oil and gas drilling leases and the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. They're likely to finish this up tomorrow, and of course live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Have all members voted? Any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 188, the nays are 236. The amendment is not adopted. Will be in order. For what purpose is the gentleman? The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 3408, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 3408 and has come to no resolution thereon. The Chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 1162, an act to provide Quillen Indian Tribe tsunami and flood protection and for other purposes.
Chair, a little bit higher. The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 36 U.S.C. 2302 and the order of the House of January 5, 2011 of the following member of the House to the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
Mr. Israel of New York.
Okay. The House will be in order, and if you have a conversation, please take it off the floor. Are we ready for one? Please, members, take your conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The Chair is prepared to entertain 1-minute request. For what purposes does my colleague from Louisiana arise?
I ask permission to give 1 minute to the House.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, for 50 years, the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital has been one of the leading facilities for researching and treating catastrophic diseases in children. Every year, nearly 8,000 children are treated at St. Jude's. That's why I'm proud of a group of friends back in my hometown who, for 36 years, have been raising money for St. Jude through an annual auction. When the auction started, the first goal they set was $10,000. Well, that has long since been eclipsed. This year was another record-breaking year. The Minden, Louisiana St. Jude auction held earlier this month raised $1,065,235 to help the ongoing work of saving children's lives. So thank you to Melissa Brown and Christy Ruppel, the co-chairs of the Minden St. Jude auction. And thank you to Pete Treat, who, after suffering the terrible loss of his 5-year-old daughter to leukemia, started the Minden St. Jude auction and now has had the privilege of watching the auction raise more than $1 million for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Thank you, and I yield back.
So, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas rise? Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The gentlewoman is correct. The House is not in order. Please take your conversations off, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak of a loss that so many have spoken about over the last week, and that is the loss of Whitney Houston, who I would imagine that everyone would acknowledge the beauty of her music and certainly the beauty that she was as a person and a human being. What a very sad loss for her daughter, Bobby, and her mother, Sissy, her aunt, Dionne Warwick, and the extended family members who loved her dearly. But we cannot help but be reminded of Whitney's beautiful voice singing the Star-Spangled Banner after enduring the Gulf War, or the words that she sang, "Yes, Jesus Loves Me," in the song that she sang in the first acting effort that she did in The Bodyguard that was so superb. And then we can't help but be reminded of that song, "I'll Always Love You," that has touched everyone's heart. Whitney touched our hearts. And my constituents, Kim Burrell, Bishop Woodard, and others, are deeply saddened. And our good friend, Congressman Don Payne, who has been in touch with the family and who is helping, he has been a comfort as well. And so I simply wanted to say, Whitney, you've given us much joy. We remember your music of the 70s and 80s. Many of us danced to it, but many of us were made happy by it. And we realize that your legacy will survive. We thank you, and we thank this wonderful family for sharing you for some more than 20 years. And we thank you for that beautiful, beautiful voice that sang the Star-Spangled Banner like we've never heard it before. We will always love you. God bless you, and may you rest in peace. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. The request for 1 minute. The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with great privilege to wish a very happy birthday that will come on February 23rd to one of our most distinguished members who had served for so many years, Congressman Louis Stokes of Cleveland, Ohio. He will turn 87 on February 23rd, and truly he deserves recognition during this Black History Month, and I pay him his due honor. He grew up in difficult circumstances in public housing. His widowed mother had to raise her 2 sons, one of which, Louis, became the first African-American congressman ever elected from the state of Ohio, and his brother, Carl, the first African-American mayor of Cleveland, Ohio. Can you imagine that family? Can you imagine their struggle? I wish to place in the record tonight some of his story, but one of the tremendous accomplishments that he achieved as an attorney was trying many cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, including a case which created Ohio's first mostly minority congressional district. And then later in life, he had the opportunity to run for that seat. He changed the face of this country. I am just so pleased to call him our friend, and let us take the time to fully recognize the admirable and path-breaking contributions of former Congressman Louis Stokes during this year's Black History Month. He deserves it. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. Are there further 1-minute requests? The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Ms. Moore of Wisconsin for today until 3:00 p.m.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from L.A., Mr. Fleming, Louisiana, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, the GOP Doctor Caucus comes together to discuss important matters regarding health care. Tonight, we're going to focus on saving Medicare. Now, this has been a very interesting discussion, really going back to the days of the Obamacare debate, where we talked about how we would finance Obamacare. And lo and behold, in the middle of the debate, we find out that the members of the other side of the aisle decide that they're going to help finance Obamacare by taking out over $500 billion, $500 billion from Medicare over the next 10 years in order to help finance Obamacare. Now, if you think about this, I may be missing some slides here, but the CBO states that Medicare may become insolvent as early as 2016. So I think the focus right now with regard to Medicare, an important part of our entitlement program, has got to be how are we going to save Medicare, and I have an array of colleagues here this evening that are going to help me develop that issue. Again, I'll go back to the financing of Obamacare, and that is cutting out over $500 billion from Medicare in order to help finance Obamacare. And there are some other pieces of the financing as well. The individual mandate, which is soon to go to the Supreme Court. And if that's struck down, that'll be another piece of the financing that won't be available. Tax increases, of taxes, excise taxes, taxes on equipment, taxes on tanning beds, many different new taxes, as much as $800 billion over 10 years of new taxes in order to finance Obamacare. Then there was the Class Act, of course, which was long-term health care, which the actuary said from the beginning would not work. It would not finance anything. And then last but not least is the student loan program, which was nationalized in order to siphon off profits from that to help finance Obamacare. And we hear talk now about forgiving those loans, which means that it'll probably be another bailout, much like the mortgage. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to speak out tonight on the fact that Obamacare is going to bankrupt this country if it's actually fully implemented, but more importantly, Medicare will become insolvent as early as 2016. And we're going to be talking about how that's happening, how we're seeing skyrocketing cost, and some of the things perhaps will be discussed tonight, how we can save Medicare. And again, in closing my initial comments here, I will have to emphasize to you that our colleagues from the other side, inasmuch as they somehow want to blame us for ending Medicare, which not a single member on the Republican side wants to do that, of course, but they accuse us of this, but in fact have yet to submit a plan that will save Medicare, will prevent it from becoming insolvent by the year 2016 or 2022, depending on who you believe. So with these opening remarks, I would like to open the floor to my good friend, Dr. Harris from Maryland, and would love to hear some of your comments about saving Medicare and other matters having to do with health care.
Thank you very much, and thank you for yielding me some time to speak on this very important issue. You know, as Mr. Speaker, as the gentleman from Louisiana has said, we really have to talk about saving Medicare. Medicare is under assault in a way that has never been under assault before. The gentleman from Louisiana mentioned quite accurately that the President's health care bill passed 2 years ago would take $500 billion from Medicare spending on our seniors who are currently receiving Medicare. $500 billion. Now, how are they going to do that? What are we not going to deliver to those seniors? Well, the way it's done is the President appoints the Independent Payment Advisory Board, 15 appointed, not elected members, no appeal from their judgment, and what they're going to do is they're going to say, you know, in a year when looks like we're going to spend a little more on Medicare than the country can afford by the budget, we're going to decide what can and can't be delivered. Now, the President's budget he just released this week makes it even worse because it sets even a lower budget target for Medicare spending. And of course, the President doesn't even deal with the issue that's before the House this week, which is what are we going to do about physician payments? Now, Mr. Speaker, I represent a rural area of Maryland, Maryland's 1st Congressional District, where it's already very difficult for seniors to find a physician who is willing to take a new Medicare patient because, to be honest with you, they're afraid that their pay is going to be cut 30% on the end of this month, on February 29th. And the President, in his budget, doesn't even deal with this issue. The President doubles down on the President's Health Care Act. He sticks to that $500 billion in cuts that's going to occur, and not only that, he lowers the threshold for that Independent Payment Advisory Board to begin rationing care to our seniors. We have got to save Medicare. And, Mr. Speaker, you know, some of the people listening are going to say, well, we're not going to believe, you know, these people, they all wanted to vote against the President's health care bill. You know, Mr. Speaker, they don't need to believe us. Go to the Congressional Budget Office's website, nonpartisan, doesn't pick sides, says that the Medicare plan is going to go broke by the end of this decade. And if you don't believe them, go to the Medicare Trustees website. Just go to Google, search Medicare Trustees report. They say it goes bankrupt a few years after that. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman is right. We have to address Medicare, and we have to address it now before the President's Health Care Act destroys health care for seniors. My mother, 88 years old, depends on her Medicare. She depends on her prescription drug coverage. She depends on it to have access to the physicians that she needs for her health care. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid under the President's plan, my mother and millions of other Americans, our seniors receiving Medicare, are just not going to have the care they are used to and that they deserve. We need to save Medicare. And, Mr. Speaker, I think we're going to hear about some of the ideas tonight about how we're going to do that. So I want to thank my colleague from Louisiana for yielding me these few minutes, and thank you for coming to the floor and doing this work tonight so that we show our members, show the public who's watching, how we have to save Medicare for our seniors. Thank you for yielding me the time.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland, my good friend, who's an anesthesiologist, practicing anesthesiologist for a number of years and very experienced. Before I recognize my friend from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, I did want to point out a couple of things. Remember, I said a moment ago the CMS actuary, in this case, projects Medicare program could be bankrupt as early as 2016. This is 2012. That's 4 years, Mr. Speaker. Where is the Democrat plan to save Medicare? The Republicans, on the other hand, we've already passed a budget last year, and we're working on another one this year that would do that. We just could not get Harry Reid to even salute it, much less have a vote on it. Also, Medicare costs are projected to grow substantially from approximately 3.6% of GDP in 2010 to 5.5% by 2035. The physician payment formula in Medicare needs to be fixed or seniors may lose their doctor, cost $316 billion, and that's what Dr. Harris was referring to, that it's already very difficult for doctors to make it on what they're paid, and they're looking at a cliff of a 30% reduction in their pay. If that goes into effect, Mr. Speaker, a lot of seniors out there will not have access to health care. So I want to show you, before I recognize my good friend, what this means in graphic form. And as you can see, the purple aspect of this is Social Security. The green is Medicaid and other health care. You see it rising fairly steadily but plateauing. But look at the red. That's Medicare. That is Medicare. And in out years, going all the way out to 2080, it just goes straight up. And, of course, that's largely due to an aging population, baby boomers like myself getting older. But everything about this program has way outdistanced any projections of what that costs are. And so this really takes it up to a point where Medicare alone, if not dealt with, not reformed, and saved, will eventually displace all of our budgetary spending, that alone. And of course that means no defense, nothing else, no running government whatsoever. With that, I would like to recognize my good friend, Dr. Phil Gingrey, gynecologist, obstetrician from the great state of Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague from Louisiana for yielding. And as I look out over this packed House chamber, and I see 7 of my colleagues who are MDs that are participating in this special order hour on saving Medicare this evening, I'm estimating, but they're about 175 years of clinical experience in the aggregate among these doctors. I am very appreciative, Mr. Speaker, of the Republican leadership and the leadership of our committees that deal with health care, and I'm referring mainly to Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce and Education and Workforce. And many of the members here tonight serve on one of those 3 committees. So our work in the Congress, although not exclusively on health care, I think each and every one of us, the members of the House GOP Doctors Caucus, came to Washington, gave up our medical careers with mixed emotions, I guess, but feeling that there was a need. There was a need that we had to try to address. And thankfully our leadership has committed to the House GOP Doctors Caucus that we will be part of the discussion, and we will be part of the solution to saving Medicare. We are, I think I can speak for my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, in regard to our universal opposition to this new entitlement program, Patient Protection, and I call it the Unaffordable Care Act, sometimes referred to as Obamacare, not solely because of its threat to Medicare, but to a large part because of that. And my colleague from Eastern Shore, Dr. Harris, spoke of the amount of money that was taken out of the Medicare program, something north of $500 billion, and from a program that he also emphasized, as did Dr. Fleming, that by a date certain, it could be as early as 2016, Medicare Part A, the hospital trust fund, will be broke. It'll be insolvent. There won't be any money there to honor those claims. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris, referenced his aging mom, and I hope she's in good health, and we love our moms. His mom, 88, my mom, 94, Mr. Speaker, and my mom, her life is just as precious to her as anybody's life in this chamber that may be 60 years younger than Mom Gingrey, Helen Gingrey, at age 94. But she depends on this program. She wouldn't be alive today if it weren't the benefits that were available to her, whether it's medication under Part D or whether it's the ability to be treated for cancer, which she recently was and had a surgical procedure. So I don't want to take too much of the time, the allotted time tonight, because my colleagues, I want to hear from them. But I just want to say this, that we as the House GOP Doctors Caucus, in conjunction with the physicians in the Senate, sent a letter 2 weeks ago to the AARP, American Association of Retired Persons. I don't know how many people age 50 are retired, but when you include all of these folks that join AARP under the senior status, you're talking about 35 million or more that are in that organization. So we felt very strongly, Mr. Speaker, that we needed to reach out to this organization, which we did. I think some 26 members, House and Senate, signed a letter and asked them to meet with us. By the way, Mr. Speaker, we did hear back from the Executive Director, Barry Rand, just within the last couple of days. So what we want to do is say to them, no matter where we have been in the past in regard to issues, Medicare Part D, the support of or opposition to Obamacare, clearly, surely we can all agree in a bipartisan way that we have to save Medicare. And that's what this hour is all about, to talk about that. And I look forward to the opportunity without a lot of a public fanfare until we decide what we can agree on and what we can come forward with in regard to saving Medicare. We, the physicians, the health care providers in the House and Senate, in conjunction with the American Association of Retired Persons and other retired groups, the one that Jim Martin leads. One of my colleagues will mention that in a few minutes. All of a sudden, we're having a senior moment on the name of that group. But a great group, a great organization. We're going to work together on this. And we're going to go forward to the American people in a bipartisan way and say, you know what? We're going to do it now. We're not going to worry about the results of the next election. That will take care of itself. The American people understand who they want in Congress and who they want on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue based on what we do to save these legacy programs.